Welcome to the Lion's Den Radio, the radio that explores genres of all kinds from all cultures. Konstantin Patrianakos, Kai Ulak, and I, Jean-Luc Ardet, are your hosts. Today, we're being joined by a very special guest. Some of you may know him as Coach J. Please welcome Mr. Herbert. Thank you for coming.
Fellas, thank you for having me. I feel really honored to be part of the Lion's Den Radio, especially being your inaugural episode. So, congrats and good luck.
Well, thank you. So, February is Black History Month, and we here at Crestwood's Lion's Den Radio would like to honor the month by having a den discussion about black music. The black community has influenced music in immeasurable ways, and cultures around the world owe thanks to that contribution. In today's den discussion, we are talking about many important black music genres, including soca, soul, reggae, and gospel. So, is there a genre that you would like to talk about first?
Honestly, when you came and asked me about these genres, I was like, I love the idea. And I think if anything I have to start with first is like that whole calypso soca, because I am from the Caribbean. I was born in the Caribbean. I'm from St. Kitts and Nevis. And truthfully, that's where my love of music began, was listening to whether it is like steel pan and band clashes. So that's where we definitely should start.
Okay, so I have a definition here that I found in my research, but do you want to maybe explain like what you think the genre is all about, or like what defines the genre?
Okay. Well, with soca music, and that's probably what most people see it as in today's world. That's what you hear for Carabana here in Toronto, or even at the Raptors game, you'll hear artists like Bungie Garland being played over like the loud system and stuff like that in the middle of an NBA game. But soca music, which is now our modern music, truthfully, some people think it's a sect or like a branch off of calypso music, which is really Afro traditional music. Mm-hmm. So it's the Afro diasporic music that has met the Caribbean and then has kind of developed its way from there. And it's really more about storytelling in a time where you wouldn't be able to necessarily write local news in a paper because blacks were not owning the papers, slavery was still happening, indentured servitude was happening throughout the Caribbean region. One of the ways that we told our stories was through music. And so calypso would be that folk end where things were happening even once islands became independent. You would be talking about political leaders, activists, things that are going wrong, social issues, everything from hunger, education, domestic abuse, violence, weather patterns changing, the changing of your community with like new immigration and different people settling in. That was really calypso. And soca has really just, all it's done is taken that, it's upped its tempo, and still has that very controversial mindset to it, a lot of double entendres. So it speaks of what the people are currently going through, and that's what soca music is. It really is the combination of African, Afro-diasporic, pop-ish music and Caribbean percussion, and how it all came to a head.
Wow, okay. So, I found that soca music, so it says that it originated in Trinidad and Tobago in the 1970s, and it's shortened form of soul of calypso, which references calypso, of course, right? And as you were saying, calypso was a really big part of like the African influence. But then, as it turns out, the creator, or who many people credit as the creator, he goes by the name of
Garfield Blackman?
I have Lord Shorty on here.
That's his stage name, Lord Shorty. Garfield Blackman is like his government name, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it says that he was credited for making the very first soca hit, which was a song called Indrani. Mm-hmm. And it also references the like East Indian like rhythm influence that was very present in Trinidad.
Yeah. So absolutely. So Lord Shorty, for most Caribbeans, like it's kind of controversial when it comes to saying where does soca and calypso and those things originate from, because even though in the Caribbean we're considered one region, but we're still independent nations, right? We are all sovereign states, or some still part of different commonwealths. But really Lord Shawty, he was the one who was able to bring it to the masses, to the media, because of the global impact that Trinidad Carnival has. Trinidad and Tobago has really taken on kind of like that flagship for soca music and calypso music as well, kind of bringing it to the world. But it does span throughout the entire Caribbean. Things like steel pan, which actually was invented by a Grenadian who moved to Trinidad, still kind of has that Trinidadian connection to it. But like with Lord Shawty and stuff like that, when you see the combination of, like you mentioned, that East Indian, so throughout the Caribbean, what really happened was slavery happened, transatlantic indentured servitude. So the Caribbean isn't just a place where you'll find those from the African diaspora. You'll find East Indians, you'll find indigenous persons from the Caribs and the Arawaks that still to today live within the Caribbean. Of course, indigenous persons were killed out throughout the Caribbean, but there are still certain pockets and a lot of like communities there. But with soca and how soca took flight, really had to do with, there was, and it's kind of like how soca meets house dance, because it was like in the 1970s where you could see tempo of music was changing. There was that liking for that up tempo and being able to go off like the 2/4 time and just being able to make things a little bit more danceable and things like that. And people, what we would call chip, were marching in the band, and that's the way we would celebrate. That kind of movement of music is really what helped La Chate just pick up and become such a household name. But like when you look at that, his impact still to today, when you look at things like Super Blue and Fan Lions, all of these like big names, Bungie Garland, Masha Montano, all of these different artists, they kind of always go back to still that storytelling of the roots. So even if you look at the lyrics of soca music, instead of a lot of just repeat, and I know that people might only hear the chorus, but if you actually looking at the verse and what's written, it still keeps that folk and to today, where it's like I'm telling an actual story from start to finish. So even with East Indian influence, that's like we have soca chutney. And even though I'm from the North Caribbean, I love a soca chutney. And you'll hear songs talking about whether it's something as controversial as cheating on a wife or your partner, and you'll go from that to the family finding out, and now the person's in trouble and they're shamed, but they're going to go to the party anyway. Like it just speaks of all the things that are the social dilemmas that are happening within the community, within the society, regardless of race or where your family originated from.
Yeah, and it's like a very energetic, like as you said, a very energetic music genre, and like they play it at carnivals and festivals. And one artist that you mentioned, Machel Montano, who a lot of people call King of Soca. A lot of people say that he's credited for kind of like popularizing sort of like a call and response in like the lyrics. Like he'll say like certain phrases like jump up or like put your hands up or stuff like that. And if it's like a part of a carnival, right, people are dancing to this, it's blasting through the speakers, people are like really getting into it. And I find that like a really interesting part that I wasn't really expecting.
Like, well, especially with Marshall, for sure, he definitely has been the person to, I think, give what the Caribbean region needed, was to give it that global push of we are making music on its like to the 10th. Oftentimes, like everything is so American centered. And he was basically saying, we write for all of the bigwigs. A lot of major artists have Caribbean writers who are behind them. So it's like being able to push that aspect of, well, that call and response, really what it is, it's the idea of freeing up. It doesn't matter if you have the most money, it doesn't matter what you look like, it doesn't matter if you're tall, you're short, you're thin, you're chubby, it doesn't matter what it is. We can all be in a band, we can all be in a fete and in a party and still enjoy ourselves and have a good time. It's an opportunity without violence, without stress, and we become like an equal common denominator of just people. So definitely Marshall has done that. And he's done that since being a little boy. That's why he is credited to being the king. Like he's been an artist and singing since he was like childhood, winning competition since he's a child. And now he has like Marshall Mondays and stuff like that within Trinidad Carnival. And he is a legend. People like him, Kes the Band, like these are groups, like Kes is a group, a family group of like all musicians who play their own instruments, father with his sons and nephews that have just been like so pivotal, there we go, to just the advancement of music and have actually been on like major movie scores and stuff like that.
So yeah, soca was the one genre that you mentioned that like I hadn't heard of before, and it was like I was already familiar with soul to a degree, right? I knew what like reggae was. I kind of knew about gospel, but like I had never heard of soca. So it was really interesting like to like go into it and like see what it is and like listen to a bunch of music. And then there was a song that I had heard many times that I had no idea that was soca, called Hot Hot Hot
Yeah.
by Arrow. And funnily enough, Arrow is not from, he's one of the artists who's not from Trinidad. He's actually from the island of Montserrat.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that hit is like, was huge. And it's like it's something that you would still hear at like weddings, basically like everywhere, right? And it like, I think it like really summarizes well like what soca is. It's like very enthusiastic. It's involving everyone. It's involving everyone, and it's like it's just like party music almost.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because you're it's like for celebrations, right? One thing I also wanted to talk to you about or ask you about is soca also seems to have like a lot of like electronic sounds or like synthy parts. Like how did that like kind of become like part of it? Do you know?
Okay, definitely. So as you're like the fact that you were talking about like feeling hot, hot, hot and stuff like that. So being from St. Kitts and being from the north, we had like Burning Flames and like, Sparrow, and those are like calypso artists and stuff like that. The whole idea of like the way the region kind of worked together, it was like your artists would actually just like move from island to island. So if you look even to today, when our carnivals are happening, they're generally either in Christmas or they start in June to like end of August, and our artists would actually travel. So it's like a sense of like brother and sisterhood, where it's like if you're an artist and you're big in your island, like for example you'd start in Trinidad and then you would move your way down until you end in Grenada, in like what was first or second week in August. And so it's like it's really a regional combination of like allowing the music to grow, feeling hot, hot, hot. I know like all the what I would consider all the resort songs, like Who Let the Dogs Out, all of these songs where and they have so many other meanings. Like I'm sure someone's listening and be like, oh, Mr. H has talked about like their actual meaning behind Who Let the Dogs Out. These songs are very controversial, but they sound innocent as is. When it comes to like the synthesizing of music, what really happens is because in the Caribbean at times, you're not always sitting around where you have the biggest studios, where you have people who have been able to take conservatory of music and going into their grade 8 piano and things like that. A lot of these musicians are ear taught, ear trained. They are church taught, church trained. And really it's just being able to, if I can repeat this rhythm, if I can get these 8 to 16 bars and this specific sound, now I can develop a song from there. And it can make it easier to perform. It's not always easy that you're gonna get 2 trumpet players to have brass on that. But if you can put that in on your keyboard, right, your little Yamaha keyboard that you got at Christmas time, and then you make actual hits, it's really just being able to use what you have.
Mm-hmm. So, did you have something you wanted to
I
say?
actually wanted to add something as well. So my music taste is very limited. It's not big whatsoever, and I only like a select few types of genres. However, I am trying to expand my music taste. Would there be any recommendations of artists or songs to start me out that would help me actually listen to more soca music?
Or even just for like our listeners.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think that the easiest way, or the way that I might suggest that if you're looking to find soca music, I think that Patrice Roberts, Fan Lyon, some of the female artists who don't sometimes get some of the love that they deserve, absolutely need to be recognized. Reason being is I think it blends over enough to what we consider like R&B pop with their vocal like activities. Plus, truthfully, like I'll be honest, I don't sound like this with my family, right? When I moved to Canada, I didn't have this Canadian accent. So it might even be harder to understand oftentimes some of the male singers of understand what they're actually saying. I find the females like Their music's at the same tempo, same energy, same power, but the clarity, and I think that might make it a little bit more fun and enjoyable for a new listener.
All right, thank you so much. I
Yeah,
appreciate
and
that.
I mean, of course, like lyrics are very big. Like they're very important for many people. So you mentioned that like you want to recommend some of the more some of the female artists in soca. Like for example, you mentioned Patrice Roberts, right? And because you said it's because they're easier to understand because maybe some of the males might have like a heavier accent. So if people getting into it, for them to understand the lyrics, like listen to them because they'll be easier to understand. Would you say that lyrics are like a very important part of soca?
Absolutely. I think that unfortunately, the world that we're in right now, everybody is about the gyration and the rhythm and the syncopation, which are all great things. Like I love to dance. I love the idea of the energy and the emotions, the endorphins that music can bring from dancing. But for me, and for example, like my wife and I laugh about it all the time. There are certain songs that we now as adults knew that we were singing, like soca and calypso songs, that we're like, what did that mean? And like today you'll hear cursing in like mainstream music. Soca's not really about the cursing and profanity. It's not about that at all. But the double entendres and what things mean and the actual like development of the lyrics, you'll realize that you could be singing a song and you're like, oh, that's not nice. Like I'm gonna let little secret out, and it's probably one of the funniest ones to myself. Whenever you're like at a wedding or at a resort or on vacation, like who let the dogs out, like I mentioned earlier, the song is really about who let ugly girls out. It's talking about like the end of the night of the club experience. And no one really knows. And like the song is used and has been used in commercials. And island folk, we watch this and we're like, you're missing the whole point of the song. Like it's actually rather derogatory. It's mean, but it's catchy, right? And so being able to understand the lyrics is definitely very, very huge because the song could be making fun of you, the singer, and you don't even realize it. I know that when we were talking about soca music, and you guys were like, why the synthesized sound and why sometimes it sounds a little artificial. And we talked about the idea of, being able to use what you have. Like soca music, which is loved by the world, even in the region, sometimes is not loved that much. And I mean by that of like, for example, I grew up in a very religious household. My grandma, everyone, I still consider myself to be uber religious. But for example, my grandma would tell me to turn off that kwelbe. And kwelbe is basically that like secular music, right? And so the church didn't always appreciate that singers, because there's certain songs that you're allowed to sing, sacred songs for God. And when you're singing soca music, calypso music, even reggae, like those songs aren't always appreciated by the region as well. So soca music has been controversial in the Caribbean region, and outside of the world it's now being accepted. So it's interesting now to even see like soca music has bled its way into even church music as well.
Church music, like gospel. So gospel, we know, is like it's a genre that focuses very heavily on like vocals, for example, and it has lots of like religious content, and it's kind of like something that was started up in like churches in like Africa or the Caribbean. And that shows a lot in the music, and you hear it. And for example, they have like a lot of call and response, right? Like so.
Tons.
Yeah, tons. So you were mentioned that you were introduced. Were you introduced to like gospel music by your parents?
So gospel music definitely by my parents. One of my aunt's best friends, Mavis Drew, she was a local Kitishan artist, gospel singer. I grew up in church. I went to an art school where I took vocal music, and I've been singing my entire life. I still do sing. And so gospel music has kind of been my number one passion. It is my love. So my parents definitely have been pushers of me really only, like I try even now, my own personal convictions to only even really sing gospel music. The reason being, like you said, it's all about vocal skill, talent, stability, acrobatics. It's about basically an emotional internal response that you feel as an individual and that you're able to express through your vocal cords. And so gospel music was able for me, kind of gave me a home And just as I don't rap. Everybody's always like, do you rap? No. Even coming here, like when I came to Canada, and even like going through high school and stuff like that, there are certain things I miss from popular music because my family listened to soca and gospel, right? So there are some things in the 80s and 90s that I don't even like. I know now as I've gotten older and just my love of music, but gospel music has been huge for me, absolutely huge.
And it's like, and you said it like it felt like it like gave you a home because it's like very inclusive, right? And it's uplifting, and you also when we talk about like you talked about acrobatics like when you were talking about the vocals. So there's like a term that is melisma, right? It has extravagant melisma, which is like when it just in a single like syllable or like a word, like the vocals like go through many notes, right? And that's kind of like it's like kind of shows the like the ability, the vocal ability of like the artists from that genre. So you mentioned your family listened to a lot of gospel. What would you say were some of the artists that like you and your family like really enjoyed specifically?
Oh, specifically, definitely, I cannot exclude the Grace Thrillers. I think every Grace Thriller, let me say it in the North America, Grace Thrillers album has been played in my house countless times. Everything from Shirley Caesar, love a huge Yolanda Adams, CeCe Winans, Donna McKirkin. It's just gospel music, choir music, like Darwin Hobbs. Everybody has kind of like flown through my house consistently. Even my family who aren't the most religious, like still it's a thing. Sunday mornings, you put on your gospel music and you just give that time back to whether it's like personal reflection or reflection on God. And that's just what we would do. So having those artists, to me, like there are certain songs that I like that are from my grandma's age that I know all the words to, and then there are certain songs from like Madonna that I don't know. So it's kind of a little gap in my timeline, and kind of shows that I'm a little bit, a little bit more closely tied to gospel music.
Gospel, like as you mentioned, like your grandmother listened to it. There's like it has a lot of like it's old music, right? How would you say gospel nowadays fares? Either just the old stuff now, or even new stuff that is still gospel.
So gospel music continues to grow, and you have everything from traditional Shirley Caesar style music to what you consider like choir gospel, to like James Hall choir gospel, where it's like a lot of like super sopranos, like 6-part harmonies and the splitting and the acrobatics of like soprano, alto, tenors, and just like the movements, to things where like Don McKirkin, which is more worshipful, or even like Hill songs, which is more contemporary. Gospel music is definitely continues to grow, and I think one of the amazing parts of it growing is that you can get everything from gospel rap to gospel pop, gospel folk. Everybody, like even as much as he's probably one of my least favorite artists, but even Elvis Elvis loved gospel. And so that's some of the stuff that I really like. And I think that with gospel music and how it's going to continue to grow, my expectations is that it will always have a touch of what's modern or what's popular at the time. And because it's just the way that it will need to grow, or it will eventually just die. It's going to have to keep on like growing and progressing.
Does gospel music ever like go into other religions, or is it still very like strictly Christian?
Still very Christian, 100%. And honestly, that's some of the controversy, because if you are a Christian gospel artist, the idea of, do you sing other songs? Are you able to sing secular music? So for example, like someone like a Yolanda Adams and like CeCe Winans, they've been on, like CeCe Winans is Whitney Houston's cousin. She's been on albums like Waiting to Exhale, one of the biggest musical soundtracks for a movie. And people kind of give her and BB Winans like a hard time because they do sing secular music. Yolanda Adams sings everything and sings at every musical award. Like, she is a vocal beast. But people worry that she crosses over, and kind of like, if you sing gospel, you're supposed to be sacredly gospel. So it's not, I think that's one thing that we do struggle with, being inclusive. Definitely it doesn't really leak into other religions, but what I am finding is that like something that's socially hitting gospel music right now, even just Christian contemporary, is like the race conversation, because gospel is seen as black gospel music, and then you have hill songs, and you'll have like elevation church, where you'll have a bunch of black artists singing more modern contemporary, what would be considered white style Christian music, and everyone's like, oh, is it gospel? Is it not? It doesn't necessarily sound gospel, but black people are singing it. So I think gospel is still having it has some social like issues, that it still kind of has to be a little bit more inclusive. But really, I understand why people are holding on to it so tightly, because it used to be the thing. Gospel music was what, for African Americans especially, gospel music was also a way for them to communicate. Gospel music was the way that slavery, like, you knew when you could pass through the river, you knew when a slave trapper was coming to get you. Gospel music told you when you were in the free, safe lands. So it ties so tightly to African Americans that I get where they're coming from, and why there is a whole idea of like keeping it true or as pure as possible. But as we progress, and as like there's more inclusivity, oh, that was bad, inclusivity, there we go, guys. We'll go from there. I think gospel music is going to grow and just keep including more people.
If there was one gospel song that you would say is maybe your favorite, or would be like the song that people should listen to really understand or really like get into gospel, what would you say that one song could be?
Oh gosh. Okay. Probably the hardest question that you have asked me so far is this. Okay. So I'm gonna. This is completely personal. I have, and she's actually a local Toronto artist. Her name is Aleen Lewis, and honestly, all the listeners, please go see her. Like, you can find her on Spotify. Her husband, Stephen Lewis, is probably one of the best producers I've ever met. His work is just flawless, and he does tons of work everywhere. I think he's a dean of music at Ontario Bible College. I think that's the institution's name. But like, he records and does everything for everyone. But she wrote a song, I Am God. And that song for me is like so simple, because it's like, it's so melodically clean, and it's so, without being heavy, without being over religious. It just speaks to the fact that, no matter what time you're going through, that I've spoken, like, I, being God, has spoken to your life, and you're going to be okay. And whatever your beliefs are, you'll be okay. And I knew this was going to happen. You'll be okay. It's reassuring. And that song for me, like, it does it. When I'm at my most, like, my stress level is the most. I remember that was a song that when my grandma died, that I was here in Toronto, and I was actually going to do a gig, and got the call, and I had to head back home to Ottawa. And like, that was a song that took me all the way there, took me through the week of organizing things, 2 weeks, and brought me back to Toronto to get back to my regular life, and still is like my number one go-to, will make everything okay. Like, honestly, I Am God is probably one of the most prettiest songs ever written. But at the exact same time, and this guy, he's super controversial. His original artist name was Tone, and it's Tonex. Now goes by B Slade. And like, his whole life was controversial. He was a pastor's kid, super phenomenal vocalist. Like, when I mean, he could go from singing the baritone part to the soprano part, and like runs through the roof. Like, everyone thinks like Whitney, Mariah, and those guys can sing. Like, he's done tributes for Patti LaBelle. Like, he is like, knock your socks off stupid when it comes musically. He does a song, and it basically says, life's a masquerade filled with so many faces, faces that aren't even real, hearts that I can't even feel. And it's basically just saying that like, everybody's pretending to be something that they're not. And yes, even as a big gospel conservative Christian guy, like, that's my first tattoo that I got on my forearm. And it's just a reminder to me that everybody's trying to be something that they're not. So don't be mad at people when they give you a false perception. Don't be mad at people, because sometimes they're just trying to navigate their way too. And I really think that oftentimes, especially religious music, there's an idea that it's preachy, but sometimes it's like, just leave people alone. It's really about your own positioning, and if you can do that, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. So gospel and R&B were two very, very important genres in the black community, especially in America. And many artists, many R&B artists such as Chuck Berry or Bo Diddley, Little Richard, Sam Cooke, they all were incredibly influential. Some white people took R&B influences, and people like Elvis, they started trying to make rock and roll. But while the black community, they went on to create soul. So, first of all, do you think that there's like a distinction that can be made between R&B and soul? Like, what makes soul an evolution, like an evolution of R&B?
I think first, again, because of how heavy American history really is, I think that it's fair and unfair to kind of try to segregate music because music's purpose is supposed to be inclusive. Even if I can't speak the language, like I love French rap, right? And well, I can speak French, but like beside the point, meaning that it's not my primary love. But when it comes to like that whole breaking off the dichotomy between okay rock and now we have soul and one is white and one is black, I definitely think that R&B gospel has led to soul music, and or you can say soul music has led to R&B, whichever way you, depending on what state you're in like the US determines kind of which one you put first. But when it comes to soul music, I think like for example, like someone like Etta James and being able to find her space, someone like an Erica Badu, they are those people who are completely gospel. They've got that growl. They've got that like little yodel in their voice, the distress. Like even someone like a Mary J. Blige, who everyone thinks is like R&B to the soul. But I'm like, if you ever hear Mary J. Blige sing Kitchen Live, like it knocks you off your feet because of just like the passion behind each note. And really what I love about soul music, I could sing the same song 500 times and I'm going to give you 500 different renditions based off of like how my day is going, based off of, you know, depending on who my piano player is. And soul, for me, soul music is so true. I think soul music is like listening to a child tell you how they feel at the end of a day. It's honest, it's upfront, it's unadulterated. And you know what? If you hit a wrong note, because of your musical skills, you can just slide your way right into the right note and your band just gets you and they just work with you. So I think soul music and all that adds to it is like beautiful in all forms.
Yeah, so a lot of soul artists, especially in the 1950s and 60s, were an incredibly like influential part of the civil rights movement in America. And you have some artists such as like James Brown. They have like big songs that are "Say It Loud," "I'm Black and I'm Proud."
Mm-hmm.
So there was like they had a very big influence on that movement. How would you say they influenced the movement?
Well, one of the things about black culture and I think just African diasporic culture is that it's you are expected if you have a mic to have a voice. Oftentimes, I think modern day North American culture is that you can just be a performer and you're not a leader, you're not a role model, you don't have influence, which to me I think is silly. But within the black culture, if you are a singer, you are generally always kind of put to the forefront. You're expected to be a leader. People listen to you, and then other leaders would say, well, you have to stand up for. Or it was oftentimes our songs are written, whether it's soca, calypso, gospel, soul, our songs are written from our hardship. And how do I write a song about going out and partying when I see that my people can't drink from a water fountain, are getting beaten, are being lynched and hung? So like you need to speak up. I have no reason to be dancing in the streets when I can't say I'm black and I'm proud. And sure as heck I'm gonna say it loud, right? So like those kind of things, where you want to listen to soul music, but I can't come through the front door of your establishment. I think that these artists had honestly an innate reason to write these controversial songs that basically said, I'm demanding to be seen, I'm demanding to have value and to have a position, and if you're not going to give it to me, I'm going to take it.
Yeah, it was very powerful, very positive as well, because a lot of it was like, rather than maybe trying to focus on like negative, it's like, this is how we're going to overcome all of our adversities. And that's just a big part that seemed very inspiring. What are some soul artists that you personally connect with?
Soul artists that I love, I will tell anybody up front, you have to definitely see Erykah Badu live. It's an out of body experience. I know she's a modern artist and people probably don't give her the light that she deserves, but just phenomenal. And funny thing is, one of her sisters is her background vocalist. So when she like sometimes passes the mic off to her sister, you're like, you sound the exact same. But obviously being the front leading star, like there's just something that she just gives to you. Like Bag Lady just never sounds so good. I also love Lauryn Hill, her story, her experience. I love the fact that she's willing to record without all of the edits. I think that takes like, no matter how much you sing, no matter how many people tell you you sound great, there's always something in the back of your mind where you know you missed a note, your breathing was off, something, but Lauren just doesn't care. She is literally there being like, I have a story to tell. I have an experience to tell. I'm going to tell you that my toe hurt if it hurts. I'm going to tell you I'm sad if I'm sad. I'm going to tell you that I dropped my lemonade on the way to, to this performance. And she will just make a song as we go. So I am like definitely an Erykah Badu fan, definitely a Lauryn Hill fan. I just think like they just do it. They do it for me, make me happy.
So you would say that like a lot of soul artists, especially like compared to say calypso or soca or even gospel, soul artists especially very much like represent their audience, or people can relate to what the songs are about, and so people can use soul as a means of like lifting themselves up, or maybe just coping with maybe an experience they had, or like would you say that it's the kind of music that speaks for the masses?
I don't think actually that soul music speaks to the masses at all. I think soul music is probably more easily understood by the masses. I think that there are so many things like Solange where, you have to kind of be in that cultural space for some songs, but also sometimes you have to be in that art space where some of the music might seem a little like fruity up there, kind of like what the heck are they talking about, because it is so lyrically artistic. But if as a masses you can enjoy it because of its like easy to consume melodic movements, but when it comes to like what the picture that's actually being painted, I do think like soca music, that soul music actually has so many lyrical layers that the lack of understanding sometimes removes them from getting a lot of the public credit that they need in like North American culture.
So you mentioned that a lot of soul artists they really express their hardships, or they express what they desire, like what they are trying to fight for through their songs, and that has very much been in like a black rights context. Mm-hmm. How would you say Aretha Franklin comparatively had an impact on females?
Well, I definitely think that you have to forever give Aretha her flowers. God rest her soul. When it comes to one, being a female who was able to navigate her own career, she was a boss, a business boss. Her songs are definitely about female empowerment and standing up. Even though she did sing and like speak and was an advocate through civil rights, all of these different movements, but she never left her sisters behind, and I think that was the most amazing thing ever. I think for female artists also, she showed them as not just singers. Within a lot of music, not just like black music, a lot of women aren't recognized for their artistry, aren't recognized for the fact that they are musicians first. You're just seen as a vocalist, a lyricist, or a face, right? And she could play any and every instrument. Like if you got her on a organ and she was like killing them Leslies, like you can hear that whole Detroit mix. Like she was basically like one of the Clark sisters with when she's going off on that Leslie. So I think for she showed the world that one, black female singers are black female musicians. I think that she was willing to use her moxie, her physical exterior, and her appearance for her strength. And she also showed a regalness behind femininity, which is oftentimes where she demanded respect, and you had to understand whether you liked the fur and the diamonds and the pearls and the whatever. But she walked in and she let you know that she was a woman of class and substance of the time and wasn't going to be treated any which way. And then, of course, the fact with a voice of hurt like hers, it's kind of easy, right? Like in the sense of like, you have to listen to all that power that she has. It's just, you can't ignore it.
Yeah, and that's what makes her the queen of soul, as
Yeah.
many would say.
Absolutely.
Do you have any suggestions for soul music for our listeners to listen to?
Definitely. Especially, okay, so soul music, everybody thinks that you kind of have to like go way, way back and you might not want to be listening to old school music. I think that soul music is relevant. It's still today. Check out things like Sam Hanshaw, and Berwin and Anise. Like they are the top three that probably are coming out right now with some of the hottest soul music. Sam spells his with two M's, so Samm, and like you'll really like that.
While soul was a very big part of black music in the United States, reggae was very big in Jamaica and Britain.
As Jean-Luc just mentioned, reggae came out the same time as soul did. Basically, reggae was a mixture of a bunch of different musical styles, including ska and rocksteady. Now, my question is for you: when you are listening to reggae, what do you feel or what do you think of when you're listening to it?
Now, for myself and reggae, I like that we circled back to the region, to the Caribbean region. It definitely is more of a because it originates in Jamaica. Jamaican music, reggae is still throughout the entire Caribbean. When I feel like reggae, what I like about reggae kind of still has that groovy soca flex. Of course, that ska, like that rock steady, meaning that whole like adding the guitar to the brass and being able to like lift off of that. I personally, of course, love reggae. I love the consciousness of reggae. What I like about reggae also is the fact that it is politically in your face, and I like that. Like I have a big personality, and sometimes it can be in your face, and I think reggae kind of speaks to that kind of like the inner shark that I think that we all have.
As you just stated before, how it spoke politically a lot in its songs. It was mainly made to speak up when Jamaican peoples were being oppressed around that time. So when you listen to a bunch of different songs, is it mainly just talking about oppression, or has it evolved into mainstream styles of music?
Oh, reggae, I think mainstream music has kind of evolved to meet reggae. What I mean by that is that a lot of what you'll see from like Izzy, Azalea, or well, not one of my favorites, or even the Justin Bieber, like so many mainstream things are off of reggae. The way that people are dressing, I know a lot of it is given to hip hop and like breakdancing and stuff like that. But a lot of these things and these styles are Jamaican bred. When you see like the pink hair and the body suits and things that you see artists are currently wearing on major stages throughout the world, a lot of those things, a lot of those vibes come from Jamaican culture. Like, you don't go to a bash and not have your best, you know. And it was one of those things where people were using their creativity to create their clothing, to create their essence, their style. So I don't even think that mainstream music has kind of like pulled reggae. I think that reggae kind of pulls mainstream music.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Now, the main one now, the main artist that everyone, when you think of reggae, the main artist almost everyone thinks about is Bob
Bob
Marley.
Marley.
Exactly. I don't know a lot about music, and even I know who that is. And around the same time that reggae came out, he actually started his own music career. So do you? And he became a famous songwriter and singer around the same time as well. Now, what are your thoughts on Bob Marley?
I don't think you can, as a person of color from the Caribbean, have negative thoughts about Bob Marley. And if you do, I don't even want to hear them. Um, have I deified him? I hope not. In the sense of I don't think he's above anyone else, but he's amazing. When you talk about Bob Marley and his struggle, when you talk about just even his desire to not allow Babylon and the things of Babylon, speaking of the West and Britain and the rule of, oppression and what was happening in Jamaica to bring his people down. And really the idea of teaching people that you need to learn about your own, learn about your culture, find your redemption song, his love songs, Two Little Birds, and just being able to understand that the love that you share, because so many people think or have been told in Black Caribbean culture that love isn't there, or family units are broken down and like not happening. And those things are so false and so not true. That I think Bob Marley is one of the people to kind of openly say that, as someone who's a Rasta, someone who's Jamaican, someone who's Black, someone who is a reggae artist, that he is equal to, and his insight is equal to anything that the Western world has.
All right. And do you believe that there is at least one major song that everyone collectively could get together and agree that this is his best song? Or do you think that he's not able to be distinguished by just one major song and has a bunch of collectives that would, in total, bring out his musical ideology?
I don't think it's fair to limit an artist like Bob Marley to think about how short his life was, his lifespan, and we're still and will forever still remake his music, still incorporate his music. This is 2023, and like Bob Marley was before even I was around, and we're still, you young whippersnappers are still talking about Bob Marley. His children, his grandchildren, his wife, the fact that his family has been able to relocate to places in Ghana and Africa, the fact that his grandchildren are still producing major musics, the fact that his kids are like, they have their hands in so many like writing projects that they don't need to just be only the person on the stage. They can be the pen behind the artist. So I think Bob Marley has shown that he embodies and he will transcend eternity.
Awesome. Now, my last question for you is, do you think there are any artists out there besides Bob Marley that could also represent reggae?
Modern day artist. Now, I will say reggae is not my go-to music when it comes to Caribbean music, but I think that you have to, if you're gonna talk about like reggae artists that you're going to love, like Tansia, like the music has changed from that conscious level of reggae, so it's really hard for me to say, because I think Bob Marley and his era, I think like the Jimmy Cliff and the Dennis Browns and those guys that were more conscious, I think conscious reggae has kind of taken a decrease, and reggae has more moved into that Tansia pop, R&B-esque, and I think that's fine and it's beautiful because they're still speaking about things that are relevant. But I think that reggae music has grown, and that really it's not fair to just classify reggae as just one kind, because you have conscious reggae, you have dance hall, you have all of these different types of things, even with like the Latin infusion of reggaeton and all those other types of things. They're all just collections of reggae, and it just speaks about the Pan-African experience.
Thank you so much for coming, Mr. Herbert. That concludes our first ever Den discussion. We've learned so much today about soca, soul, gospel, and reggae.
Honestly, thank you guys for having me. I'm so excited for what you guys are creating, and just the fact that we're taking music on a heart and mental level. Like, it's amazing.
To you listeners out there, if you see Constantine, Kai, or myself in the halls, please let us know what you thought of today's Den discussion. Any and all feedback would be greatly appreciated. Also, make sure to thank Mr. Herbert for coming onto the radio when you see him. Thanks, Crestwood.